everybody. You're listening to Humans Talk, a podcast about ideas, systems, and the people who live through them. Each episode invites you into a conversation that's unscripted, curious, and designed to make you think, feel, and imagine differently. Let's begin.
In this series of Human Stock, we explore how technology influences the world around us and how we interact with it in return. In this episode, we're exploring two big ideas. The first is a concept called balloon internet, which looks at how we access and distribute digital knowledge. The second dives into how we respond to uncertainty through something James calls the trauma doctrine of the paranormal. Okay, let's begin with the balloon internet. At first, it sounds like something out of sci-fi, but I know you've been thinking about it in a much deeper way. James,
Mhm.
what is balloon internet, and why does it matter?
Okay, so we came up with the balloon internet idea a long time ago. Um, it was back when Google was doing Project Loom. So if you don't know about Project Loom, Google used to have a project where they had high altitude weather balloons and they would try to provide free internet to them, to remote communities. And it was like a precursor to like Starlink. And so um, I feel like there was a lot of application in weather balloons and that they kind of did it wrong in that if we look at how traditional um, telecommunication systems are built, the regular, like if you're in a rural community, your antenna is about 90 meters tall and you can get internet reception from there. So basically, the idea was to, in remote communities, set up a system of relay balloons or relay weather balloons that had a tether on them that could go up to 90 meters or above. And instead of having that fixed infrastructure of a built tower for internet in remote communities, you could essentially get like a 3 by 3 meter box that would anchor a balloon that would go all the way up 90 meters plus and connect remote communities with the internet. And the only drawback to this technology overall was weather, right? Because you could get extreme weather events, and then the balloons could move erratically. The tethering only keeps them fixed in a certain radius, even if, the winds are pretty wild. So we designed a system of a detachable balloon that basically used the ambient temperature around the balloon and either hydrogen or helium. We were more fixed on hydrogen because we thought it would be more available, as most places, or like Canada first in particular, are starting to develop more hydrogen infrastructure. And then
Mm.
also we could create units of catalyst converters, so you could split water into hydrogen with electricity and some kind of catalyst like you could use palladium lined chambers or other minerals that'll help the catalytic process of splitting the hydrogen and oxygen. And then,
Hmm.
so anyway, you can get a fairly abundant supply of hydrogen if you have a steady electricity supply, and then be able to deploy these balloons. The balloons were able to regulate the temperature of the hydrogen inside of it through reflective paneling to keep a uniform temperature. And also, it had like we designed it to be cinched so it could expand and deflate, and then basically put in a heater element, a very small heater element that would heat the hydrogen, force it to expand. And in case of like extreme weather events, we could detach the balloon and then force it to go higher than the storm system, um, and try to, recuperate the internet. And then also,
Hmm.
if once the storm subsides, you could just deploy another balloon as
Hmm.
well. We put like retractive systems on both ends of it, so that like if you cut the tether, that it doesn't just start flailing everywhere and causing damage as well.
Hmm.
Um, so it was, a pretty simple system, and it kind of underlies what Project Human City tries to do when we get into technology, like physical technology, is to build an efficient system that is ultimately scalable and sustainable. And so it puts us in contrast in things like Starlink, which I am not a fan of small satellite systems. We already have a lot of trash in space, and a lot of the systems that we're going to have to develop, if we're going to actually be a multi-planetary system, requires that our airspace is free and is as clear
Hmm.
as possible. All the garbage up there already poses a detrimental threat to existing or potential space programs. And that actually gets us into another thing that Project Human City is trying to do, is to create a space elevator.
Hmm.
And so, in creating a space elevator, that would eliminate the need for rocket launches on planet, which burn up a lot of CO2. And we designed a system to build a space elevator by using balloons to essentially um, construct, like using the temperature differentiation and buoyancy to help autonomous construction as you go all the way up to the upper atmosphere, because it takes a
Hmm.
lot to, it's super far. Like,
Hmm.
um, I think it's like five. Uh, I'm like, I know what the number looks like in my head, like, but I'm not sure if I'm going to say the right placeholder. But I'm pretty sure it's like 5,000 kilometers, 5,300
Oh,
and
like after the atmosphere,
to
past
the
the
exit.
atmosphere.
Yeah,
Uh-huh.
to atmosphere. Sorry, it's really far.
Yeah. It's
But
it,
um,
Uber won't get you there.
no, but we designed a new system for space travel. So like you see, like they have reusable rockets. What we did was aim to scale the balloon internet idea even more and make even bigger balloons. And
Hmm.
to get to that point, we had to start looking at how we could fabricate super materials on
Hmm.
scale, which led us to developing a self-replicating 3D printer. So we have like I'm like, I don't know if you've heard about all this stuff or you've seen it in Slack, but we do have like all these like crazy projects, and they all stemmed from the balloon internet. It's
Oh yeah.
like it all came from how do we do this better? How do we connect something else? Right. So the balloon internet was one of the first things for remote internet about like 8 or 9 years ago. And
Hmm.
then 3D printing was something that was at the same time, but we were looking at it more as we looked at 3D printers as we want like an IKEA like store. Like you'd have one store in like every city or community, but then you would go there to 3D print all the goods that you downloaded, right? And
Uh-huh.
to create an open economy that way. So we were looking at 3D printers like that for a long time until um, we started to shift into building a space elevator. And the space elevator that came recently as well. We were recently coming up with innovative ideas for our government, for the Canadian government, and so like one of them was repurposing Kid Mine
Hmm.
in Timmins. So Kid Mine is one of the deepest mines in North America. It's almost 3 kilometers deep, and so and it's also soon decommissioning. But if you look at the geology of the site, there is more mineral deposits even deeper down. And if you were to dig deeper, the payoff of those mineral deposits would be more than the value of the mine has produced to this day. And it's a very old mine. They got 3 kilometers down. Um,
Hmm.
so there's like a big lodestone there. So the idea there was to continue excavating the site and to build to build a space elevator at that site, because you to build a space elevator you have to anchor it deep into the earth, right? So
Hmm.
we already have a situation because of the geology of the site. It's like a volcanic plume almost, but it's like dormant and fully, like, it's not volcanic, but just because of the way it was, it's kind of it's an interesting shape, to be honest. Like I have something in mind that it's actually shaped like, but it's not PG to say. Um, but so basically, you have a shaft that goes down, and then it has like a flared base at the bottom, and then under the flared base, there's a deeper deposit of minerals, right? And so they've gone to the shaft part and they haven't gone to the flared base part because that's too far to go um, to mine traditionally. Like they said it would be too expensive just because of the current market of it and the current technology of having people down there. We'd have to get to the
Hmm.
point of opening up multiple mine shafts, get a way better oxygen system because you're 3 kilometers into the earth. Just like the electricity pumping air down there is a lot
Hmm.
different. So one of the like in order to actually do it, we're going to look into autonomous mining, and autonomous mining is something that we have been looking at before.
Hmm.
Um,
And when you say a space elevator, is that exactly how it sounds? Like it's an actual elevator that'll take you from here to space? Like you're not
uh,
using a rocket, just something that propels you. Like how does that work?
how does it work? Yeah, well, my system uses buoyancy and then electromagnetic
Mm-hmm.
pulse, like thrust. So there's electromagnetic railings in the inside of the track that will propulse you up. So it
Hmm.
is like taking an elevator. And then to save electricity, there's like dead zones where it doesn't have that infrastructure, and it actually uses external balloon systems to lift.
Hmm.
Um,
Speaking of the balloons, I wanted to ask, do you think like these balloons, can they be maintained by communities? Like, or is it going to need like some corporate or federal, infrastructure help, or is that like something manageable by communities themselves?
I think by full rollout, so it's like if we get funded within the next year or so to do this project and to start the trajectory of it. So
Hmm.
we were projecting that it would take about 5 years to fully complete the self-replicating 3D printer that we need as like the cornerstone, right? Like our
Hmm.
key factory component would take about 5 years to fabricate. And after that, we're looking at creating models of that same system because it is self-replicating, right? So one of the things there is making smaller and smaller versions. So we can potentially create a unit for remote communities to fabricate all of the components of the actual balloon internet infrastructure themselves.
Hmm.
So it's kind of like a nesting box thing. The whole goal of this, like the whole goal of our technology infrastructure after we kind of shifted into this um, uh, a full menu of items, and I'll go through the full menu of items besides the 3D printer and the balloon, is that we would fundamentally shift the economy into a very mineral-based economy. Well, we already live in a mineral-based economy, but um, the processes could create the trade of minerals between people a lot more common to
Hmm.
you know to power these machines, right?
Hmm.
Because of they're designed off of taking raw minerals and refining them. So we're probably going to get to a stage where we're trading refined minerals and then putting the refined minerals into our machines on a community level to produce the technology and infrastructure we need to upgrade our community and
Hmm.
build stuff like that. So we're essentially doing what we do already. Like we have the big open pit mines that go to some centralized factory that ships out components to people. But what we're doing now is we're collapsing that supply chain by miniaturizing a lot of the components using super materials to allow us to extend or rather contract the typical industrial processes.
Hmm.
So having higher heats in smaller spaces, being able to control higher heats, and at a more fine tune, being able to control magnetism at a very fine scale. All of these will allow us to, with traditional 3D printing of like powder metallurgy, um, chemical vapor disposition or deposition, um, will allow us to manufacture things that usually take huge clean rooms, and huge factories at a much smaller scale.
Hmm.
And then, like I said, create the point of having a mineral trade between people more commonly. And then that kind of leads to like with our whole space elevator idea, the whole idea of having a space elevator is so that we can start mining in space and having an easier exit and entry process. And once that goes, or once we set out like the first ships to mine minerals, it doesn't even matter really who does it, right? If we're going to do it as a proper system of like autonomous mining, once
Hmm.
somebody does it, the cost of minerals will plummet and the economy will have to shift into a recycling economy of the existing minerals that we have now because there's no political or logical justification to continue strip mining the earth for resources that we can get in space for free on scale, right?
Hmm.
It
But
doesn't
it'll
make
probably
sense.
just be more expensive to get. So you're going to have to imagine this, like you have all these asteroids there and people are
Mhm.
greedy and everybody starts fighting for this is my asteroid, this is my asteroid. I can see the humans doing that, even though like the space is vast.
Mhm.
And but getting there is also is going to be is going to be is the issue is not only the mining, I would say, is also
Mhm.
how do you get up there and who can get up there, because not
Oh,
everybody has the technology to travel into
sure.
space.
Yes. Like when we proposed it, we proposed a plan to our government. We gave them options to allow other governments to pay into our system to give them preferential mineral right cost. So like
Mm,
when we bring back minerals, they will get a preferred market cost like mineral futures, right? Pretty much to set up a mineral
mm,
futures market. And they buy into that so they don't have to develop their own space programs and can coordinate their resources in one space
mm.
program to make sure it gets done, right?
So everybody
So
just kind of partners up, and
yeah,
I
so
see.
it's like
Hmm.
every country, like the idea was like, I think the cost was every country that wanted to participate had to pay $100 billion. So
Hmm.
that's a lot of money. But then, if they paid that $100 billion, when we started bringing back the minerals, they would be able to buy minerals for $1 per kilogram, regardless of the mineral,
Hmm.
which is vastly cheaper than minerals on Earth right now. So it is a long-term investment. All these countries, it makes sense for them to invest in that system, and then they can move away from strip mining their own countries. They could focus on beautifying their countries, and then we'll create that kind of positive feedback economy that we were talking about in previous
Hmm.
episodes, right? And it'll also allow those countries to shift into recycling, right?
Hmm.
Because they will know that in the long term, recycling will therefore because of this paradigm shift, recycling will be the premium economic driver for these economies, right? They
Hmm.
want to recycle all of the trash and all of the like metals that they have already in circulation so that they can utilize it in the meantime. That can create a secondary market that can support these um, that can support the general economy overall and facilitate this market shift, right? So you're getting a
Hmm.
lot of people working into the recycling industry. You have a lot of people refining and going through this process of being more mindful of the materials that they're using to build things because there's going to be a shortage of minerals because they're gonna start banning mining or reducing mining overall. The closer those ships get to coming back, the more restricting mining will become in those countries.
Hmm.
And I did say to them, and I like in our plan, we did highlight that it could create an issue in countries that couldn't afford the $100 billion buy-in, right? It could create a
Hmm.
two-tier economic system. And so that's why, as Project Human City, we wanted to actually do this project because we were outlining how being the middleman facilitator of this, we would redirect our funds to the developing world and help leapfrog them without undue cost or them these big nations thinking that they're doing it. Our cut in facilitating this market would be accelerating everybody and making it
Hmm.
accessible to everyone. And so, that it is a big proposal, so it's probably going to take a lot of time to mull through, but um, it came with a lot of interesting things. So the first 3D printer that we suggested is called the Art Cradle 1, and it's about a 12-meter by 12-meter production space. And then it kind of scales down, or actually not scales down, the framework for that 3D printer. So you have like a
Hmm.
production space, and then you have like the outside tiling, and then you have a component layer with various subcomponents in it, and then a chassis. that like
Mm.
supports and holds the infrastructure together. We designed it so that we could take the same chassis and some of the same tooling mechanisms and create a biopharmaceutical copy of the Art Cradle one as well. So we could start producing personalized medicine on scale as well.
Mhm.
Because a lot of the processes in industrial fabrication or industrial manufacturing, um, like the heating processes, the chemical solvents, and stuff like that, those can be adapted on a macro scale to the production of pharmaceuticals, like
Mhm.
crystallization, distillation, and isolation of compounds, right?
Mhm.
So we created a bio cradle as a subcomponent, and then we're also looking at an art cradle nursery, which would allow us to combine mechanical like fabrication and biopharmaceutical components to start fabricating organs.
Mhm.
Um, because it kind of needs both of those components together. The
Mhm.
rigid framework sometimes of like more rigid materials like silicone, and um, the chemical solution based process of cultivating and curating cells.
Mhm.
Um, and so it needs both of those functions. And then out of the Art Cradle one, other things we suggested to the government is that if we are going to start recycling on scale like this and shift economies, we should introduce a world train. So a maglev train that would actually go around the world
Mhm.
and connect all of the continents. Like we suggested a route that basically follows the Trans-Canada Highway. It
Mhm.
branches up across Saskatchewan, and then it veers into the Yukon Northwest Territories and out into Russia across the Bering Strait. And then as it goes into Russia, it creates a pipe fork that goes into China.
Mhm.
It goes across Russia, and then down into Africa, and then have another branch that goes into Europe.
Mhm.
And then um, we were also suggesting it was a big thing, but we were suggesting building a train track that or underground. Well, I position as above ground because we already have ideas for floating islands, right? So I came up with a design of using something called electromagnetic torsion. It's a process that we designed for spacecrafts to create artificial gravity. But it's essentially creating two spinning plates in opposite directions using very strong electromagnetic magnets to create an artificial gravity. And so the
Mhm.
idea in this one, we would use it to keep the train track on top of the water by having the shell
Uh-huh.
consistently spin, and then you'd have floating anchors at every junction point, and then the floating anchors would support like a city infrastructure around the trains. So we would eventually create a chain of islands that would go from St. John's um, to England. So a really
Mhm.
long distance, and then it would use like heat sinks to capture the heat in the building, and then keep hot air under the supports to keep the buildings floating on top of the water, right? So all the heat people produce, they get pushed and funneled back under the water to keep them up. Um, and then also using cold water with that same system to keep the cold, like pumping up cold water, pumping down hot water, and then trying to create an artificial current that kind of goes
Mhm.
um, under the islands to keep them buoyant, um, and then some passive water filtration, and then also some systems to mitigate the air, like the open air, because you're not going to have land masses to slow the trajectory of air, so the winds can be very powerful, right?
Mhm.
So then also structures to use the kind of like sails to keep the system up as well. It would be like sails, and then you'd have like a free water area, and then you'd have mangroves, and then you'd have the human population, and then at the center you'd have a train the train line.
Hmm. Well, that's an ambitious project. If anybody, before we move on to the next topic we have for today, if anybody wants to learn more about these PHC Project Human City endeavors, is there any reading they can do? Is there a website now or any information they can look into?
We're actually some of the items, so I didn't even go through all the items, but some of the items that we're gonna make, we're actually going to pre-sell them to the public.
Uh-huh.
So there's personal items that we're gonna make. So one of them is the PHC medbed, which
Hmm.
uses super materials. Essentially, it's like the idea of it is to um, kind of like recycle all of, or not recycle all of, but it's the idea of it is to extract all of the waste and pollutants out of your body and your DNA at like a cellular level.
Hmm.
So it uses things like um, sonic propulsion, so like sound waves. It uses light. It uses lasers on the surface. It connects to you and can like intravenously filter out your blood, clean your blood, and then put your blood back into you, which
Hmm.
is which is a kind of interesting process, but it's been something that's been done a lot or is starting to come up a lot in like healthcare. So you can we like pull out the blood out of your body, split it, the plasma out of it as well, clean the plasma, clean as much as your blood as you can from like microplastics, metals, heavy metals, and then put it back into your body. It would administer like cellular therapies. So like the um we would have it has like a articulating electromagnetic um head that kind of will send directed electromagnetic pulses into your organs and into your body, and also directed ultrasounds as well, for process of like both diagnosing your organs and addressing like blockages on a micro scale. So later
Hmm.
versions look at like small site incisions to perform clearing surgeries, so like opening up blockages and stuff like that. But that like we're selling the initial version of it that
Hmm.
just does the medical processes I talked, nothing of like surgical incisions of blockages because those require nanorobots or like tendril robots to go into your body, and that's a little bit too advanced. But we could still do like the plasma splitting, blood cleaning in a single unit, along with the electro magnetic components. Because the idea of the fundraiser is building up so that we can build our Cradle One, like the actual
Hmm.
bigger production site, and set up the supply chain there. And then that comes with like creating AI environments to understand what we can fabricate in this space, and then also like the auxiliary products. So it would
Hmm.
cover all of our research and development in that fundraiser. And like if you're buying at that scale, like to be honest, I think that's like you have to pay like $999,000 for the PhD med bed in the fundraiser scope. It's like one of the most expensive things, but we have a lot cheaper things that you can get. Um, like one of the lower things that are kind of high tech is called the Visum massage, and it's looking at using single sheet materials to create a face mask, kind of like a plastic mask that
Hmm.
can filter the air. It can change your appearance on the outside, but like photorealistic, so you could just look like someone else and no one else would tell that you're a different person, by changing the components under the. It would change the it uses electromagnetic fields to change the underlying graphene alignment, and then you use the double edges of graphene, so like a kind of like a file system to kind of like shift them like this to refract light differently on top of a flat layer. And so it would articulate light fields coming in, and then also looking at micro laser arrays to also project light across the face mask as well.
Mm-hmm.
You're using a graphite composite on it. So it would probably either be like a copper composite or maybe ferromanganese, depending on what kind of other reactions we want. Ferromanganese would help if we're doing filtration um, processes,
And that just
but
changes the appearance of the face. Is that what it
mhm.
does?
It changes the
Uh-huh.
appearance of the face and then like filters air. That's a precursor to like we want to create a whole full body suit that kind of like insulates people from pollution, and then also uses photo optics to change their appearance.
Mm-hmm.
So then we also want to look at creating something called covenant bond notes. So instead of having regular money, we want to give everyone this like silicon bill that kind of like Futurama. You know how in Futurama the money changes?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So the idea
Mm-hmm.
is that if you want to change money with someone, you have to be holding it, someone else has to be holding the other
But
side, and you have to be like talking in a calm manner to each other to exchange money to each other.
that's from wait, I don't remember that in future. I remember watching those episodes,
Oh,
but I don't.
that you don't have to do that like you don't have to do the whole like talking part. But in
Uh,
Futurama, they had one money note, and then the money changed. Like if you went to a store and like you like kind of like scanned your money, and like the price on the money changed, like the value.
uh,
Um,
Interesting.
yeah. And then the cloud kite system. So that is the satellite system that I was talking about with balloons.
Mm-hmm.
Another thing that we want to create is something called Squishy Boy.
Mm-hmm.
So Squishy Boy,
That
um,
sounds that sounds interesting.
yeah, Squishy Boy is a project to create a personal aid robot with the maximal amount of usability, but minimal amount of infrastructure. So what it does is it uses like again using super materials, but not necessarily super materials. It's like a um, kind of like a plastic. It's a weird polymer. It's just like it's like a polymer graphene coating. So it's not fully metal, not fully plastic, but it's super strong. And the idea is to pretty much uh, create a robot, like a puppet robot, using a strong electromagnetic motor, shifting motor inside to pull strings and like actuators in the
Hmm.
robot. So kind of like automatons, but more articulate than that. And then so we were looking at two designs. One design that would kind of look like Baymax from Big Hero 6 or like Big Hero 5 or what is it? 6 or 5 anyway. And um another one kind of like a more of an octopus looking model. And so
Mm-hmm.
the idea of these, they would have mainly gas inside of them and then also um, several liquid components. And they would aim to help you do things around your house. Like the squid arms have like
Mm-hmm.
articulating tentacles and like suction cups that can kind of grip things. And then the Baymax one has kind of like hand components as well to it. It does have like a internal skeleton, but again, the skeleton is very minimal, and is looking at using high capacity batteries and strong electromagnetic motors to shift the internal components. And then, so one of the things of having a very small internal skeleton is that we wanted to, let's say, in an emergency situation, make it so that these we could trigger chemical reactions inside of the robots to help them expand, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it's like if you were stuck in rubble, help them expand or detract as well, get smaller, right? But
Mm-hmm.
ultimately, they'd have like a, a fairly firm pressure, right, from
Mm-hmm.
the polymer, and so it could get really small. Part of it is like part of the inside is looking at like snake robots and how those work inside of the internal structure. And so it would allow it in like emergency situations to get to places really small, and then expand. So it's like if you're trapped under a building, it could get to you, and you could have a piece of like debris over you, it could get into the crevice and then expand using a chemical reaction. And because the outside is a polymer graphene component, like a composite, the graphene is really strong. It'll keep it
Mhm.
like actually solid as the chemical reaction lasts. It could allow people to get out of that situation. If you're in a flood or disaster situation, it could turn into a raft for you. So it's looking at all around emergency situations and having that personal robot be more attentive to these things. Because one of the only things we can't fully solve yet is natural disasters. It is definitely on my radar. I actually
Mhm.
submitted a plan um, to the government as well. I'm like, if we're doing all this space stuff, this is how we can stop having hurricanes.
Mhm.
So I actually submitted a plan about that as well,
Nice.
of how to decrease the severity of hurricanes using solar sails at the Lagrange point. So we have a lot of controversy on geoengineering and blocking the sun. So I basically suggested we could block the sun on trajectories of hurricanes alone. And if you were to block the sun on the trajectory of a hurricane, you can downgrade it at least two categories just by blocking the
Mhm.
sun um, over the hurricane and tracking it, right? And
Hmm.
the amount of property damage, or sorry, I suggested this because um, the amount of insurance that it would save, like amount of insurance payout by downgrading all of the hurricanes that happened over a year by two categories, would pay for the space program in the first place.
Hmm. Look, there's definitely a lot of issues. I mean, a lot of projects that you're developing here. And honestly, I think we should have like an extra episode, separate episode, just to go over the type of plans, and just get the public to be more aware that these plans
Mhm,
underway. But some people are thinking about this.
mhm.
Um, well, if you don't wanna if you wanna add something else before we move on to the second topic,
Yeah.
we've been yeah. Do you want to add something before we move on?
Um, no, not really. The only
No.
other things is like I guess that we could talk about in the next one, but in the trajectory of like technology, we've also suggested terraforming Venus.
Hmm.
That's something that I'm really big into. I want to actually walk on Venus and die on Earth. That's one of my things.
Well,
Um,
I'm gonna write this down because I was thinking terraforming Mars was a thing.
no, I
I
don't.
didn't know that.
I like we've suggested plans for terraforming Mars that are kind of different from what traditionally said, like looking
Mhm.
at the fault lines, launching high-speed impact drills from upper atmosphere into the fault lines, and then trying to burrow down as far to the core as we can, and then creating a chain reaction to reignite the electromagnetic fields at the core of the planet. Because other than doing that, the only other alternate to making Mars sustainable en masse is to
Mhm.
create a new um, electromagnetic field. So other anything else that you do will strip the atmosphere, right? You could
Mhm.
nuke the poles and create water, surface water, that will be stripped off by solar radiation so fast, it doesn't even matter. So you have
Mhm.
to, we suggested a series of high powered, like kind of like Starlink, but much bigger satellites that would create a field of electromagnetic waves across the planet and artificially create a electromagnetic sphere. But the more sustainable option is to find fault lines, geographically map the planet as deeply and as complexly as we can, find the weakest points to get to the core, and then reignite the core either through a chain reaction. But if we have the entire path, we can either just send something right through to the planet's core,
Mhm.
kind of like a small, kind of like a nuke, but the whole planet's a nuke because that's how nukes work.
Mhm.
You have that big reaction, a little pin, and it starts reacting, right? Um, but that's far
Hmm.
hard. Like that's a huge
Yeah.
undertaking. It would
Well,
take
it has to
advancements
start
in
sometime,
drills. Yeah,
right?
yeah. And like even like the drills from space, like we designed instead of having like we wanted to create a drilling company, but the whole thing was instead of having traditional drill bits, we wanted to use a graphene um, rafter system to essentially make the head of a drill bit one uniform diamond that would compress in on itself. And then as it took on the heat of compression and spin. The fractures were like pre-designed to just reinforce the actual strength and trajectory of the diamond bit. Because if you
Mm-hmm.
make a giant diamond one piece, it will, and like making a drill, it's too brittle. So it's like you're making facets of a diamond that sit into facets of a diamond that
Mm-hmm.
can withstand the impact and um, heat, like, well, like the heat loss, but the heat gain of deep drilling. Because it's one of the
Mm-hmm.
problems when you're drilling deep underground, even if you're not at the core or close to it, it gets extremely hot very close to the surface relative to the distance that you have to go. So you have to either create a system to keep it going, and then even after we get to a certain level of heat, we have that the composite or the composite fractures in the diamond structure. So then we can shift to using electromagnetic fields to allow us to actually parse the
Mm-hmm.
material in front of us.
Mm-hmm.
Otherwise, it'll just burn up as well. And then we'd have to use like a lot of tungsten, um, a lot of tungsten because that's the thing with the
Mm-hmm.
highest melting point. But even we'll get to a certain point where it's more of like thrusted, like it's more of like axing into a planet as opposed to drilling. So we'd have to put in more impact shocks. So it's like
Mm-hmm.
the drill bit gets to a certain point, and we have the initial shaft, and then what we do after is we send weights at extremely fast speeds into it to knock the drill bit even further into the planet.
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, we definitely need to have a separate episode for this because I feel like we haven't covered everything here.
Yeah.
But just to watch the time, just to watch the time here, I want to get into our second topic. You've been developing something called trauma doctrine of the paranormal. This is one of my favorite topics to discuss: faith, spirituality, science, and
Yeah.
how to, all that mix in. And so it deals basically this doctrine that you're developing. People react to what they can't explain, right? It's
Yeah.
how people react. And this might be a bit provocative for some people, but that's what we're here for, to stir some things up. So let's unpack it. And so what is this doctrine all about?
So it takes a positive psychology approach to unexplained phenomena. And so, it's not, I'm definitely not the first person on this. People have talked
Yeah.
about how different sensory limitations and things like this create folklore and mythology, right? And we can see it in a lot of cases when we apply science to traditional stories. So there's like a traditional African folk tale about like a demon that was like if you sleep away from the fire or sleep too close to the fire will get you, and
Mhm.
it would kill people in the night and leave their bodies, and then it adapted to the people sleeping off the ground. But if we look at the practicality of it, is most people sleeping too close to the fire get carbon monoxide poisoning and then die in their sleep from asphyxiation, right?
Mhm.
So there's a component of the natural world and phenomena that can be explained, and some paranormal story that we add to it. One of the ideas that I like a lot is the idea of dragons. Like people, we have dragons in mythology all across the world, but I'm pretty sure dragons came from people finding dinosaur bones.
Huh.
Um,
That's interesting you mentioned in this. I don't know if you ever listened to Jordan Peterson. I saw
yeah,
this one podcast where he delves into like religion, and he
yes,
and he says that throughout all of the religions and myths, like you always have the snake or the dragon. There's always this reptile that people
yes.
are afraid of. But he's coming from a different perspective. He's coming from our ancestors when they were in the wild or whatever.
I would agree from the
They
snake
were
and
afraid
from
of
that perspective.
snake. Yeah, yeah,
Yes,
snake, fear of snakes.
yes.
Mm,
Yeah, no, I definitely get that from the fundamental like building of our psychology aspect. And I definitely think that those archetypes have have gone through our society as well, because then we also have like the hunter always wants to be like a lion or a cheetah because we
mhm,
see these natural hunters in the wild and we want to emulate them, right? They're
mhm,
bigger and stronger than us, and we usually use them as signs of power as well. So it
mhm,
is and I think what it is overall is that when we are experiencing anything in the world, we if we look at it from a post-structural sense, we are experiencing a vast object that is passing through us, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so as it's passing through us, we are just able to perceive the edges of our senses of it, to recognize what we call it, individually from any other object
Mm-hmm.
that passes through us. And so that kind of ties into the idea when I was talking about how you can have different minds and different concepts within languages that aren't necessarily translated. It's the same idea, is that you experience anything, um, everything that you experience is passing through you and you were limitedly experiencing it. And what you refine, of it is your complete knowing of it, but somebody else will know it in a different way and a common way, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it's like even right now, like light is passing through us, and as we are able to, parse out the light waves that we can understand, right? That's what gives us our sight and our understanding of the physical reality around us.
Mm-hmm. Do you
So
think this perspective could coexist with like other interpretations of, faith or meaning? Like for example, for myself, I can't say that I'm an unbeliever completely
mhm,
because I believe there's a higher power, but that's me, right? And then
mhm,
when I'm thinking about the sincerity in your beliefs, for example, let's say if I'm only believing in God because I want him to do something good for me, or I'm afraid of something, right? So
mhm,
then my belief is not 100% as sincere, right? So I would say that in a from a faith perspective, this idea does make sense even to me, because you really want to look into, like, do a self-diagnosis to
mhm,
to to why are you believing, right? What's making you,
mhm,
because if it's coming out of fear, then something needs to change, because we shouldn't be doing it just because if it's our fears are compelling us to take some form of control, because we don't have 100% control,
mhm,
right? Like for example, uh, do you think that like design and engineering, like the tools, like we were just talking about, all these ways of fixing the issues that are keeping us in danger, right? Do you think that will help reduce the fear of the unknown, and maybe that is the reason why people are less faithful, I guess, have less beliefs into paranormal as they used to be, because of the technological advancements, that we're kind of taking more control of our surroundings.
mhm. Kind of yes and kind of no. I actually think it would, promote these beliefs more, and I would kind of lead people to try to embody them more. Um, Especially like, it's kind of like a bad case, but I'm thinking of, um, Slender Man. Have you Slender Man?
I've
The
I've no I've
the
Yeah, I've seen that
Yes.
one.
So the
Is that the
idea of
one where there
Slender
was
Man,
it was like a nightmare?
yeah,
And
I'm not quite sure where
yeah.
it started, but it was like a whole like folklore thing for a while, and
Hmm.
it was like big in pulp culture, but it ultimately led to, a couple of cases of children killing other children. Um,
uh
like horrifically, like stabbing deaths. And it was built on this artificial social zeitgeist that kind of bridged technology and reality. And it got to the point where they believed in it so much that they acted out on these social sentiments that were projected in this techno materialistic ether, right?
hmm
So, like, both the technology is reinforcing it and people around them are reinforcing these ideas. It becomes more real, and then it becomes this like paranormal fixation, or like that, um, enables horrific acts. And I think that also, like, one of the problems people are like, I think that people see with, reimagining the future is the abundance of free time, and already the issues that people have with, idle hands is the devil's hands, or that saying, right?
hmm
Um, but I also like, it's kind of like is into Israel problem. I don't know if I've ever said that to you, but an into Israel problem is something that I write about as well. Is like it kind of derives off of the idea of the Exodus from Egypt and how it took 40 years. And then after they got into Israel, none of the old generation could go into Israel. Is that
Hmm.
there are some social changes that, in order to fully come about, it will take that full generational turnover, and kind of like a dying out of an idea for it to be fully like taken out of the social zeitgeist or ameliorated to a reasonable extent.
Hmm.
So I think that's they're complex problems, and I think it's interesting because it's like it gives people this this false promise of trying to live in a reality they can never actually attain and be in, right? It's
Hmm.
like, how do you be a good person when no one's been a good person to you, right?
Hmm.
That's even the same. That's like the fundamental idea there, right? It's
Hmm.
like you're asked to give something that you will never receive back,
Hmm.
and it creates a problem, or it creates a complex in people where they do not want to shift their behaviors or their beliefs because they won't get anything back from it, right?
Hmm.
And so it's like, how do you get people to live in this idealistic state? And it's actually interesting that you were mentioning the idea of like like a higher power and understanding what is right. Like personally, like how I um parse like morality is, I kind of like, I believe, like it's a weird belief, but I also believe I'm like everybody else. Like I don't believe there's division. So it's like I believe that I bear the consequences of my own like actions in other people. Like I kind of usually explain it like I don't hit other people because I don't want them to get hurt, but it's like I don't hit other people because I'm gonna live to that point of me hurting myself in them. Like I'm
Hmm.
going to be them. Like it doesn't matter. Like there's no difference, right? So it's like, why would I hit them? It doesn't make sense at that
Hmm.
point, right?
Hmm.
And it's like, and it kind of articulates, or not articulate, but navigates how I deal with other people, because then I will also often deviate to trying to make people realize the reality of all realities as opposed to doing anything to them. So I just
Hmm.
try to enlighten them more as opposed to actually doing anything to them, because then they're just getting more clarity, right?
Hmm.
And it's like it kind of negates the idea of like good or bad, right? It's
Hmm.
just being like, you know, there are, and I also see that like we take personal accountabilities for some of these things, right? So it's like if you think about it in the economic and capitalist sense of like the objects that we consume, like I was a vegetarian or like a vegan for a long time. Like I was like a vegetarian from like when I was born to like 11, just because I
Hmm.
did not like meat, and I was like I had like ARFID, but I don't think it was like we never diagnosed it as ARFID as a kid, but
Hmm.
definitely looking back, that's what it was. Because yeah, I didn't eat meat till I was like 11, 12, and then I ate it till like I was like 21. And then I stopped eating it again until like 2 years ago. And then that was just because I was starting to get sick. But the whole idea of giving it up as an adult was more of a ethical reasons. Like I wouldn't want to be this animal raised in a slaughterhouse and like dying, right? And I'm like,
Hmm.
me participating in that. But then it also branched out to me thinking it's like, you know, and it's like the plants feel pain too, but it's also like, um, I would rather be the farm worker than the slaughterhouse worker, to be honest. And that's kind of what I
Hmm.
was picking. I was like, to me, I was picking which path of being along the total supply chain of me having this produce, of me having anything, which would I prefer to have, right? Which of these people in these supply chains would I want to live as? And I'm like, I just couldn't do the whole slaughterhouse if I had to work there. Like, so, off to the field. But
Well,
um,
some people can eat meat because of the slaughterhouses.
yeah, but it definitely kind of like sparks the idea of moving for change in these things, but then also the acceptance of the reality of having to consume these things as they are already, right? I can't just take something that is perfectly presumed, like perfectly produced and not have these things. And I
Mm-hmm.
also don't believe in like running away from the world and like homesteading and saying, oh, everything's mine, you know. I like because that doesn't devoid me of it. Those seeds that I cultivated came from people that are still in community. Everything, you know, I'm never going to be completely isolated from that land. And that land was dispossessed from somebody, unless I go back to like Africa or
Mm-hmm.
other places. And um, you know, I always say you can't run from the world because the world will come to you. So
Mm-hmm.
is you can either change the world and be the change that you want to see in the world, or it will come to you and will corrupt you and make it into you.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Actually, Roberto Unger, he has one of my favorite like quotes I kind of think about often on this. He says that those who try to reject society and fail to remake it in their idealism ultimately become sterile, sick, and die.
Because they let the world shape them into who they are. I mean, who they really are not. Because the world is not going to shape you into who you really are. Corruption is not
Yes.
who you
Yep.
really are,
Yeah.
and that'll for sure make you sick.
Yes.
If you're not living within your values, within your purpose, you will definitely at least become mentally ill.
Yeah. For sure. There's a lot of
Mhm.
talented people who become mentally ill just because they see the reality of the world and everyone adhering to it, and you know they can't rectify, you know, living a moral life almost, right? It's like
Mhm.
living, and it's not even necessarily saying living a moral life, but it's like living an honest life. Like the levels of the that illusion, as it gets stripped from them, it makes it intolerable for their spirit. And it's, you know, it just comes to how we are socialized with it. And it's not to say that people who, you know, live in these systems have different spirits or anything like that. I think it's that it's kind of like the idea of light moving through you. You can only, um, you know, capture the image and the idea of reality as much as you can sense and actually comprehend as it goes through you. And the same object that's going through somebody else is going to benefit them or be refracted in a different way for them
Mhm.
to uphold the internal structure of the overall idea, right?
Mhm.
It's like as the I think is like I think of it kind of like you get that block object kind of moving through you, but that block object is a like a particle wave. So the block object's a point, but inside the object is just like wave potential, right?
Mhm.
So it's like instead of having like internal supports that hold up the structure, right? And it being like internal diamond or like you have like or geodesic pattern inside, you have the wave potential inside that goes through that block idea. Um, and that's how we're all interpreting it.
Mhm.
Um, Yeah, I actually wrote a paper about this. It's called the social particle.
Mhm.
And it talks about like the conservation of actions. And it kind of like the first article in the series is called Why Aliens Think We're Dumb. And the it basically kind of premises this belief system that I talked about, but I wasn't that direct about it. I was just like, you know, if you're smart enough to be an alien and come all the way here, you kind of come to like social consensus, right? And kind of like understand everyone as one and everything. And then um you come here and see that we're kind of silly in all of these like different divisions because it's like you literally can't construct these higher ideas or higher realities looking at these divisions and looking at the blockages, right? And
Right. It's all one. This Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's
yeah,
like you're saying the reality, even the truth, is something that moves like through people, right? And
mhm,
like we kind of just hold it up differently, but it's
yes,
all part of the same oneness.
yes,
Hmm.
yeah. And I think we kind of like I think like the first steps of like understanding that overall is like honoring work and like the work that everybody does, right? So it's like the janitor is just as important as like a rocket scientist,
Hmm.
right? Because then they both contribute to like keeping the facility running, right?
Hmm.
And keeping things going. Like, and having that respect for everyone allows us to develop that social mentality and that internal mentality that grounds ourselves in our own positions Like everyone wants to be a billionaire, but I'm like, if you're going to be a billionaire, what's your $1 billion idea? Right?
Yeah.
It's like, so let's tax them, okay?
Yeah.
Like, right? Like if you don't want to tax a billionaire because you want to yourself become a billionaire and you can't tell me your plan, you're a fool.
Yeah.
Like, like, and it's no tea, no shade, but it's just like what it's not going to fall on your lap. And
Mhm.
it's like, and for a lot of these people, they have connections, and like if you read their biographies and stuff like that and actually understand their lives, it's like they have connections that you don't have, right? And so they're
Mhm.
experiencing the object of late stage capitalism or capitalism en masse differently than you because they were
Mhm.
in positions that upheld the capitalist class and you weren't, right?
Mhm.
And so how are we going to parse that object and move through it? But um,
I guess the
I
simplest example is a half glass, half full, half empty, half full glass, right? Everybody
yeah,
will look at it and say this different things.
yeah, for sure. And I was gonna, and it also made me think of like this is why we get kind of negative superstitions and negative paranormal ideas off
Hmm.
of how we align to like the current capitalist ideals, right? So
Hmm.
it's like we look at things like there's places in the world that look at like mental illness and stuff like that as like supernatural occurrences. And even social stigma in places that don't, like in the West, right? Like, let's say we don't in the West, right? But we still have a social stigma to like mental health and other things, which in my idea is just as attaching a spirit to it as saying someone's possessed
Hmm.
somewhere else, right? Because ultimately it changes the way we all act around them, and it creates a trauma feedback system, right? Because
Hmm.
we see how we isolate the other, we don't want to become the other, and we position ourselves outside the other, and then use these higher social narratives on script to um, position ourselves and transcend any accountability to the other and grounding ourselves in a common human experience. We
Hmm.
I think it's paranormal in the sense as well that it's there's a paranormal idea of thinking that you're separate from everyone else. Like and even like people talk about how the West is all about individualism and stuff like that, but even the West just reorganizes community to focus on the individual and like the psychological components of it. But the West is it still has um, those social hierarchies that construct these deep meanings for people, right? Like people talk about capitalism being meaningless, but you also participate in it and have meaning in your life that is derived from it, and just that's like the consequences of our being, right?
Hmm.
So the paranormal thing is reinforcing the illusion of division and the illusions of separations that um, support this alien idea, right? That
It's
that
really an
keeps us,
idea of disunity that
yes,
there's separate parts to this reality.
exactly.
Hmm.
And um, it's it's interesting. Like I definitely think it allows people, like if we kind of develop this mentality, if properly grounded in community and insulated, it allows us to get over a lot of our wounds and traumas that we are inflicted in our own lives, um, and like move past that, and develop a greater sense of unity. And so, what I
Hmm.
mean by insulating and grounding it is contextualizing our traumas as systems and how they're derived from systems. And so, an example of that is that, like, to be frank, I was beat as a child. Like, that was how my parents disciplined me sometimes, and it was brutal. And so I didn't grow up with the mentality of hating my parents for that experience. I developed an understanding that my parents were parenting in a way that they were parented. One,
It's cultural too.
yeah, so
Right.
the cultural component of it, like, and then also understanding like the frustrations and complexity and the limited communication and developing of the auxiliary systems of
Mhm.
navigating the space of parenting, devoid of these old um, colonial, like these are transatlantic slave mentalities, and it's actually been well documented about how like the emergence of beating children like in the black community in America can like perpetuate from slavery and stuff like that, and
Mhm.
intergenerational trauma and the power structure of parenting as opposed to like a lot of low income parents will parent through power, like I said so, as opposed to
Mhm.
parenting through reasoning and understanding, right? And then parenting through power lends to using physical force to reinforce it,
Mhm.
right? So we're
Well,
only,
a lot of cultures actually,
yeah,
it's more of a recent thing, like in the Western mind, where uh, we've kind of came to the conclusion that it's not a good thing to beat the child because, but culture. You're a millennial,
yeah.
I'm as well. Like there was in our times, maybe not so much in the West, but almost everywhere, that was a very common thing.
Oh yeah,
For me
no,
as
it's
well, and I've never
like
took it as like I still don't think of it as in a resentful way. But
yes.
just the way I pictured it, right? I mean, the way I
Mhm.
viewed it wasn't the way it's being viewed here in the West.
Yes. But I was gonna say it's like not that the West was global, but it's like the damages of the West were global. Like,
Hmm.
so like irrespective of the West doing it, all cultures like went through phases of power and authority and repression, even insular, right? Like,
Hmm.
like you know, China wasn't fully colonized, but they had their own issues in forming dynasties and their own oppression amongst their people,
Hmm.
right?
Hmm.
So it's like to say that that wouldn't occur in their culture, right? Even though it's devoid of Western influence en masse, like other cultures, right? I think it's more a symptom of violence and power in our
Hmm.
societies, and that um,
Hmm.
it's we're giving this again like this case study of the West because it is just emerging and it's
I
the
see.
system that we're
Hmm.
living in, that we're able to draw these conclusions and like use isolated cases, like not even just isolated cases. Like I see isolated cases in like the case of like the transatlantic slave trade because they were able to find like um, genetic markers of trauma across
Hmm.
generations from this population.
Hmm.
But then, if you're looking for other cross-generational impacts of the West, you can look at India and how the frequent famines caused the population to retain body fat more because they were
Hmm.
consistently being starved, right? So it's like if your body wasn't equipped to retain calories, you were dead
Hmm.
and you weren't having kids,
Hmm.
right? So then that creates a population funnel. There's a ton of different population funnels. I'm part of a population funnel. I'm a maroon from Jamaica. And so what that means is that my ancestors on the north coast of Jamaica, when they were working in plantations at the bottom, they escaped into the jungles by running up into the jungles,
Hmm.
right? And up into the mountains because the whole north coast of Jamaica is like lowland for about like fairly wide lowland for a while, and then steep mountain, and then over the mountain, like it mountains down because it's like an island, like
Hmm.
it's a mountain coming out of the ocean, right? So it's just flattening up, right?
Hmm.
So my ancestors, they had a genetic pressure of having to get up that mountain while being chased. A lot of them died, and the people who weren't fast enough died, right? To be
Hmm.
frank, if you couldn't get up that, I've been up those mountains like with roads. I couldn't imagine running through it like
Hmm.
without roads. Like it's
and
crazy
and being
verticals
chased.
and being chased,
Yeah.
right? And so, one of the reasons Jamaicans are so good at sprinting is that all of the people on the sprint team is from that geographic
Hmm.
region where they had maroons.
Huh.
Yeah, so Usain Bolt, he's from a village like a couple towns over from where my mom's from.
Hmm.
And like It's like right all along the North Coast. That's where all the sprint teams are from. Because those
Wow.
people that you had to have fast twist muscles to get up the mountain. And it's like there's even like a UNESCO site up there, and they had treaties with the British and the Spanish and stuff like that. Like the Maroons kind of kept as a separate population for a while, but then it kind of just they amalgamated with um, people of African descent. So there's not like pure indigenous people of Jamaica
Mhm.
anymore.
I don't think there's pure indigenous anywhere anymore. I think the whole
Oh, not
world is like
really.
all mixed up with. I probably have Jamaican in me too. It's possible.
Yeah, depending. Yeah, could happen.
Uh,
I have interesting. I have like, well, I have a lot of admixtures. I'm also like part Chinese. Like I have Chinese influences, British, French. My last
mhm.
name's French. Um, but they weren't French people. They were actually British people,
No.
which is interesting. Um, but yeah. I haven't even done 23andMe. That's just what I know off rip because those are the
Oh,
people
okay.
that like.
I've never done that. I want to do it.
Yeah, I'm interested in that. Like, for knowing like what parts of Africa I'm from. My grandfather told me we were from Ghana, and the Ivory Coast. Um, but I have to
I,
check that
I
out.
was born in Central Asia, so I want to do that test because I want to know if I have Genghis Khan in my DNA.
As soon as you said Central Asia, I was like, you might be looking at Genghis Khan. Yeah,
Maybe I'm a direct descendant.
maybe. Get the hordes going.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, James, this we're running pretty much we're out of time here. And I this was a great conversation. And I think for the first topic, we should definitely maybe expand a little more in a future episode and talk about
Mhm.
some more of the projects that you were involved in. But for today, we explored very ambitious ideas, the future of internet infrastructure and others questions, uh, questions on how we respond to uncertainty, right? Through
Now, this was Human Stock, a project of civic thought and radical imagination. If something in this episode moved you, share it. Subscribe to your platform of choice and stay tuned for more voices, more questions, and more human ways forward. See you next time on Human Stock.